Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Nevin. It is July 25th, 2023, from the National Bar Association office in downtown Nashville. I'm interviewing. This interview is being conducted for the oral history project of the National Bar Association. And so to start, what is your name?
Ronald Kent Nevin.
And if anyone watching noticed the similarity of last name, this is my father. And I'm also a practicing attorney, and so I get to interview him. And when and where were you born?
Vicksburg, Mississippi, 1947,
What date?
October 31st, Halloween.
All right. And tell us a bit about your grandparents.
My grandparents, both maternal and paternal side, were immigrants to this country in the late 1800s and early 1900s.
Where'd they come from?
They came from Eastern Europe.
Okay. And how'd they get here?
They went through Ellis Island, and my grandfather on my father's side moved to Cleveland, Ohio, where my father was born and his other brothers and sisters.
Okay.
And my grandmother settled in Frankfort, Kentucky. And she lived to be 97. She was born, I believe, 1880 something, if I'm remembering correctly.
Okay. What were your grandparents' names?
My father's father was Samuel Nevin, and his wife, my grandmother, was Gertrude Nevin. On my mother's side, my grandmother was Annie Nathan. She married and became Annie Kaufman. My mother was Lois Kaufman. And my grandfather was Meyer Kaufman.
Okay. So you mentioned your mom. Who was your dad?
Lewis Nevin. He had served in World War II and came back to Jackson, Mississippi, where he met my mother. He had a job in a jewelry store and was a jeweler.
Okay. Where were they born? I think you mentioned Frankfort, Kentucky was one.
That's where my grandmother was born. I think my mother was born in Louisiana. After they had been married a while, they moved to Memphis, and I grew up in Memphis.
Okay. What did your parents do for a living?
My father was in the jewelry business, and he was a department store manager with the China and Silver department in Memphis, and my mother was a homemaker.
Okay. And so you grew up in Memphis. What were some of the things you did for, I guess, hobbies and fun as a child in Memphis?
Was a stamp collector. My uncle Louis traveled a lot and always brought me stamps from foreign countries. So I developed an interest in stamps and in travel.
Okay. Where'd you go to high school?
I went to White Station High School, where I graduated from in 1965.
Okay. 1965. So how old were you when you graduated high school?
I was 17 when I graduated. I started college later that year, so I was 17 when I first attended college as a freshman.
Okay, that's pretty young for most people to start college and to educate, higher education in general. So what was, I guess, your first part-time job, summer work experiences as a kid?
I began work as a busboy and worked in a Shoney's one summer. The next summer, I was a cook at Shoney's.
And was that while you were in high school?
That was when I was in high school.
Okay. I know you mentioned before something about working in a real estate office as well.
Yes, I had a cousin, Marshall, who worked in a real estate office in downtown Memphis, and got a job as an office boy there. His father and his uncle were both attorneys that represented the real estate company. So that was one of my early exposures to the practice of law.
Okay. And after high school, where'd you go to college?
Went to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville.
How'd you choose to go there compared to other places?
Well, I wanted to get away from home. I was looking at another college, Oklahoma. It was 400 miles from Memphis. And my father advised me that I could go 400 miles away from Memphis and have in-state tuition at University of Tennessee. So that's how I picked UT.
Okay. And while at UT, what were some of the activities that you participated in?
I joined a fraternity while I was there. That was a lot of fun. I did various activities for the fraternity, and I became the vice president of the fraternity. After doing that, I was appointed as a treasurer for the interfraternity council. I was also involved in a lot of other college activities with various organizations.
Okay. And then I know you, in our den, there's a trophy. Can you explain what that is?
Well, that's the Best Brother Award that I got from my fraternity back in 1968.
Okay. So after college in UT, so I guess how'd you end up in law school? What began your interest in law?
Well, it began very early. When I was in Memphis, I went to see a trial. It was the first time I had been in court. And Stella Stevens, who was a movie star then, she'd been in movies and on television, was in the Poseidon Adventure, was getting a divorce. And I was just curious about the legal system and trials. So I went one afternoon and sat in court to watch part of the divorce trial.
How old were you, do you think?
I was probably somewhere around the age of 10.
Okay. And you just decided to go watch a trial?
I did. I've become interested in law probably from watching TV shows like Perry Mason, Defenders, and decided that as long as I can remember, I wanted to be a lawyer.
Okay. And then did being exposed to the law from your cousin's practice, did that also influence it, or just that was coincidence?
I think that it probably played some part in it. I had a cousin by the name of Max Nathan, who was a few years younger, a few years older than me. And he had become a lawyer. Everyone in the family was proud of him. He was an excellent attorney. He started with a large law firm in New Orleans. And by the age of 30, he was an adjunct professor at Tulane University, where he taught secure transactions and some other courses, and did that for 50 years or more.
And so you're at University of Tennessee, Knoxville. You're planning on going, how do you decide, I guess, which law school did you go to?
I went to UT Law School there in Knoxville.
Okay.
And I decided to go there because I honestly liked the football program. They had some great football teams there in the mid to late 60s. And I was having so much fun at UT, not to mention anything about studying, but I had a lot of friends there as well, and decided that I would rather be in Knoxville at UT Law School than anywhere else.
Okay. Was there an LSAT when you were attending?
There was
an LSAT. Okay. To get into law school.
to get into law school.
So when you were there, were there any certain professors or curriculums that you really liked or enjoyed that stick with you?
There were some. My first impression of law school came from the professor that taught the introductory course to law. His name was Durward Jones. And I believe he said on the first day in class, he said, law is the only profession that requires you to think. He said, accountants are bean counters and doctors are plumbers. And that is the quote from Mr. Jones. I had another professor there who impressed me, and that was Professor Overton, who taught constitutional law. he thought everything in the Constitution revolved around the Commerce Clause. No matter what you thought about one issue or another, everything was involved in interstate commerce, whether it was trucking or business, anything that crossed the state line was governed by the Commerce Clause. It started small because the Constitution and the Bill of Rights reserved all the rights not taken by the Constitution were reserved to the states. So little by little, cases came before the Supreme Court where they ruled that the Commerce Clause would make something into federal jurisdiction, and it gradually expanded throughout the years. And Professor Overton can relate everything regarding the Constitution to the Commerce Club, and I'll always remember him for that.
Okay. Any other, let's see. Any other activities through law school or special memories or anything like that?
Well, while I was in law school, I met my wife Brenda, and we discovered, getting to know each other, that we both collected stamps, and as it turned out, we both had the same stamp album.
Okay, so collecting stamps from your childhood kind of helped you meet mom.
It did. We're getting to know her better now that we have things in common.
Okay. Now I know after law school, or it was during, you at one point you did join the military. Was that during law school or after law school?
In law school, I joined ROTC. Vietnam was going on, and so was the draft. And I had 2 years of ROTC as an undergraduate. It required 2 additional years in order to get a commission into the military. So I joined the ROTC, and upon graduation from there, I also received my commission in the military. And I served in the military in a reserve unit.
And what was your final rank when you were finally, I guess, retired out of the military or honorably discharged?
I was discharged at the rank of captain.
And when did you graduate law school?
That was in 1972. I graduated that year, and later that year obtained my license to practice law in Tennessee.
And when did you marry mom?
We got married in 1972 as well. It was a big year.
Okay. And how many children, grandchildren do you have?
I have 4 children, of whom you are one of. I'm very proud of all my children. And I have 5 grandchildren, whom I'm also very proud of. Each one of you is special in their own way.
And any lawyers in the family?
Well, let me think about that. Ryan, aren't you a lawyer?
I am. And so kids and grandkids, and so back to 1972. Is that when you started the practice of law? Or say 1973?
Actually, it began in 1973. I had to do 6 or 8 weeks, 90 days maybe, of military service. When that concluded, we had settled here in Nashville because Brenda was from Nashville. It was in the middle of the state. We had friends in Knoxville, family in Memphis, and friends there. So I decided to settle here in Nashville and open up a practice here.
Oh, and you also, I guess, in 1972, probably there in the fall. Is that when you took the bar exam?
I did.
Okay. And I think you had a very special bar exam, as I recall.
It was the first year of the multi-state bar examination.
How'd that go?
Terrible. I did pass, I will say that, but it was the toughest exam I'd ever taken. And I wasn't the only one that had trouble with the questions. My understanding was because so many of us did so poorly on it, they decided to only count the in-state portion, which was the essay portion of the test.
They threw out the results of The
To
first
the best of my
multi-step.
knowledge, they did. I won't swear that that's the truth, but I was always told that.
And when you get licensed, you're in Nashville. What did you do to, did you apply for jobs at firms? How did you get started?
I did do that. I applied at several law firms. I decided that the big law firms, corporate type law firms, it's not for me. I started looking around for office space, thinking of starting my own practice. Probably a little naive there to think that all I had to do was hang out a shingle and that I would get business. But met Ted Walker and Gary Blackburn also looking for office space, and the three of us opened an office in Parkway Towers. Ted and I stayed together practicing law for 38 years, sharing office expenses between ourselves and other attorneys that came in after Gary left, and that worked very well. Ted Walker became famous for his full moon parties, came to be known as Ted Full Moon Walker. The tradition began in his barn on his farm and lasted there for 15 years. When he stopped having the full moon parties there, the full moon party moved to Percy Warner Park and has continued from whenever it opened back then and still going on today.
Yeah. So you, Ted, and Gary open a law practice together, sharing office space at least. And how did you first start getting cases? You know, you hung out the shingle, you have your law degree, then what?
Well, Ted gave me a referral. He practiced mostly criminal law. He gave me a collection case to handle. I also had joined the Nashville Bar Association. It was on the lawyer referral list and got many cases from the referral service. I also went around the courthouse to visit with all the various judges looking for appointments. I got some appointments from criminal court judges, and I got some appointments from Judge Shelton Luton, who at the time was the probate judge. Most of the appointments from Judge Luton involved estates or conservatorships, and I found that of all the areas of law I had been exposed to and was being exposed to, that I liked probate the best, and it's the one that grew the most.
And so that's how you got started in the probate world.
Yes, it is.
And are you still practicing probate today?
I am, and I enjoy it very much. I like will contest. I present a special challenge. I like doing what I can to help the deceased get their wishes carried out by whatever it is that they provided for in the wills. And so it's something that I have strived to do throughout my practice.
Do you remember any of your early, like your first will contest, or any of them that stuck out that you realized, wow, this is something that I like and I'm good at?
The one that I think is the most unique and was probably my first one. I got a call from the funeral home from two nieces of the deceased. And they told me before the body was even buried that they wanted to contest the will. They had seen it, they were left out. And so I undertook that will contest, and they were successful in getting the will set aside so that they could get their proper share of the estate.
Do you remember, I guess, any of the facts of how that happened?
The aunt had a caretaker who had taken advantage of her, moved her into the basement of the house, and totally dominated and influenced what she was doing. And we were fortunate to get that will set aside.
Did she like insert herself into the will? The caretaker?
In some way, he did. He was a minister at a church, and together they benefited from the will.
Okay. Just going back to the early days of practice as well, did you have any special routines or customs that you would do in your practice?
I always wore a suit to court when I practiced, and I always had a briefcase. I did research by going to the Nashville Bar Law Library or the Vanderbilt Library, because in those days you could not get the cases by computer and do your research that way. So it took a lot of time and effort to go and research cases, shepherdize the cases, meaning that you would trace the presidents back as far as you could go to see if they were still good law or if the case may have been overruled. And the court may have made some change in the law, but you had to be careful and thorough when you were researching cases. And it seems like it's much easier today to be able to use the computer to do your law searches.
And so you were able to use the National Bar Association and was it Vanderbilt Library?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, to be able to research, because I guess as a young lawyer, you don't necessarily have all the books there and available.
Books were expensive.
So probate was a big part of, it's been one of your specialties, throughout your career. I know that you had one other area of law that was a specialty. Which area of law was that?
That was bankruptcy. One of our associates practiced bankruptcy law. He left the practice of law and I took over his bankruptcy cases and expanded my practice into the area of bankruptcy.
And I guess when did you get involved into bankruptcy? You remember?
I believe it was in the 1980s. So I'm not sure anymore what year different things happened, but
so throughout your career, were you ever involved in the bar associations or other events and organizations?
I became active in the Nashville Bar Association, serving on various committees. I was on the probate committee for several years, and in 1995, I became chairman of the probate committee for the Nashville Bar.
And I guess what kind of stuff did y'all do on the probate committee?
Well, we looked at new legislation. We reviewed recent cases for changes in the law, and we had the best attendance of any bar committee because we had free lunches, which started when I was chairman of the probate committee.
And that's a custom I think that still exists today, isn't it?
It does, thankfully.
Did you ever get a chance to teach CLEs or contribute that way?
I did participate in giving CLEs in the area of wills and estates and conservatorships, guardianships, and several of those over the years.
And then also did you have a chance to stay involved with, I guess, as an alumni with UT Law or anything like that?
Well, I certainly did. I was always a big UT fan. And so I joined the Davidson County Alumni Association. And after being a member of the association for several years, I was elected to the board of directors of the Davidson County chapter of the UT National Alumni Association.
And then any other Nashville affiliations as well?
I joined the Junior Chamber of Commerce, and I was on the Junior Chamber for many years. Became a member of the board of directors of the Junior Chamber. When I was on the Junior Chamber board as legal counsel, Richard Chambers was the president of the Junior Chamber of Commerce. As a matter of fact, Richard Chambers, I think at age 34, was the youngest president of a Nashville bank at that time. That was the Bank of Nashville. Richard saw that it was time to make some changes in the Junior Chamber of Commerce. It was a time when women were becoming more active in business as well as joining the legal profession. The junior chamber, as well as many other civic organizations, had men only as members. Richard and I got together and proposed to the junior chamber board, we're changing membership to allow women to join the junior chamber, and that was done during the time that Richard and I were on the board.
And I think you might mention that you were legal counsel to the chamber, correct?
I was, yes.
Okay. So did you have to research that issue and make a proposal, or how'd that process work out?
Well, it worked out fine. It was looking like it was pretty obvious that women should be included on that was the right thing to do. And it wasn't that difficult decision to come to, or on the research of what rights women had and what privileges and how they should be treated. That was fair.
And do you remember about what year that was that y'all made that change?
I believe that was in the mid-80s.
Then were we all one of the, I guess one of the few groups starting to do that, like kind of ahead of the time? Or?
As far as I know, we were the leading group that did that. That may not be entirely correct, but we were at least very early on in that process.
And then, were you part of any other charitable boards around Nashville during your time?
I was on the multiple sclerosis board of trustees. A friend of mine had a family member that had MS and asked if I would do some volunteer work for the organization, which I did. And after doing that for some few years, I was elected to membership on the board of trustees, and subsequently I became the chairman of the Middle Tennessee chapter of the board of trustees and held that position for 2 or 3 years.
You feel like you made an impact doing that? And
I believe that I did. I think that it was certainly that helped a lot of people who needed assistance, and we had fundraising programs frequently, usually a big one every year. And we did raise a lot of money, and I'm sure it did a lot of good.
let's see. Right now, are there any current activities that you're working on or participating in?
What I'm doing right now primarily is visiting my children and grandchildren and trying to do a little bit more travel as well.
So are there any other memorable cases that you've worked on that you're proud of where you made a difference, or just that you felt you made an impact?
Well, there was one in particular, and this case involved a lady who had written in her own handwriting in her Bible a will. She had only inserted her first name in the will and did not have a formal signature bearing the first and last name. So it was a challenge to get the will admitted to probate in trying to determine whether the first name in the text of the will qualified as a signature for admission to probate. We lost that case initially in the trial court. We appealed the case, and with your help doing the legal research, we were able to win an appeal to the Court of Appeals that ruled that that was sufficient to meet the statutory requirement of having your name written in the will in your own handwriting.
So throughout your practice of law, is there any kind of advice you would have given yourself, 50 years ago or anything like that, looking back?
Well, no, I never dreamed 50 years ago that I would still be practicing law, which I do still find appealing. I like helping people. I get great satisfaction from that. And speaking of satisfaction, one of the most satisfying years practicing law, Ryan, was after you graduated from law school and came up to my office to practice law with me for 3 years. Those were the most enjoyable years that I've had practicing law.
Well, thank you. I had fun as well. Those were good times. Any, I guess, advice to new attorneys joining the profession?
New persons joining the profession need to be open to learning the basics of practicing law that are not taught at law school. No one teaches you in law school how to file a complaint or a petition. You're reading about cases that have already been filed and somebody prepared and took to the courthouse. You need to know and learn the basics of doing that. The clerks and all the offices, whether it be circuit or chancery or criminal, can be most helpful to young attorneys. And I'm thankful for the men and women that worked in the clerk's offices helping me when I got started. I think that's a great benefit. You need to network with other attorneys, learn from them, watch them, speak with them. And I think it's maybe different or a little bit easier for attorneys that are with law firms than from someone like myself who's a sole practitioner, where you got to learn it more on your own and reach out to people for assistance. There's a lot to learn in the practice of law, and I think young attorneys need to be mindful of that. Law's always changing, and you have to know how to change with it. And that's very important.
What were some of the kind of any big changes that happened while you were practicing?
Well, the biggest change came with the change in the bankruptcy law back in 2005, when the bankruptcy law made major changes. There was a big rush for attorneys to file bankruptcies before the law changed. The primary reason was that bankruptcies could only be filed once every 8 years after the new law went into effect, as opposed to 6 years before you could file another one. And there were debtors that feared that they might need a bankruptcy again sooner than 8 years. And so that was a big change. And when the electronic case filing came into being, that was my first experience with it, was in the bankruptcy court before it came to state court. Made a huge difference on the practice of law.
Do you foresee any other changes, like electronic filing or technology changing the practice of law at all?
Well, I've noted it's coming, and I do remember when I first started practicing, and I mentioned about researching cases. So much more is done on the internet than before, not only in that, but just in communication. And it was in 1984 that I first got a computer for my office. And it's made a huge difference, and it's changed a lot since then. And I believe that it will continue to change with artificial intelligence at the forefront now and all the news, and I'm sure it will make a difference in the practice of law.
So right now, are there any, how long have you been practicing law now?
Well, it's been 50 years, going to be 51 here very soon.
So what's keeping you coming back?
Well, I enjoy what I'm doing, and I feel like I'm helping people. And so as long as I am getting that satisfaction, I'll continue to do that. I do plan on cutting back to semi-retirement, which is the stage I'm in right now. And I enjoy doing that because it gives me an opportunity to do other things other than the practice of law. But I like having my hand still in helping people through my law practice.
Is there, so we're coming to the end of this. Is there anything else you wish I'd asked or would like to tell? Any other final stories or anything?
I don't believe so. I think we have covered everything. There may be people watching this that wanted to know more, but I think we've covered everything that we needed to cover.
Okay. Well, my final question to you then is, how do you want to be remembered regarding the practice of law?
I would like to be remembered as a gentleman who fought vigorously for his clients. There's a way to do that, still be civil to other lawyers on opposing sides, realizing that whatever the outcome is, that you're going to be a person of your word and do the right thing while still doing your very best to protect your client's interest in whatever kind of legal matter it might be.
All right. Well, thank you for your time and participating in this, and we're adjourned.
Thank you.